The north is cold and full of whispers.
Moat Cailin does not sleep quietly. It breathes. The three standing towers wheezing wind through cracks no mason has touched in 300 years. The bog outside, exhaling its particular smell, dark water and rotting reed, and something beneath both that has no name, something old enough that even the trees around it have learned to grow sideways, rather than up. The northern host had made camp inside what remained of the fortress walls, 18,000 men pressed into an ancient shell, and the sound of that many sleeping soldiers carries its own weight, heavy, uneven, interrupted by coughing, and the shift of iron, and the distant cry of something in the neck that is not quite a bird. Grey Wind heard it first. The wolf had been pressed against Robb's side since they made camp, which was not unusual. Grey Wind slept against him the way a shadow sleeps, fitted to his shape, warm and motionless, and breathing slower than anything that large should breathe. But somewhere in the last hour before dawn, that rhythm changed. The wolf's chest began moving faster. A sound came up from deep in its throat, not a growl, not a howl, something between the two that meant wrong. Robb was already dreaming when the vision hit him. Not as a dream. That would always be the wrong word for it, because dreams are things you fall into from the outside, and the vision did not come from outside. It dropped into his chest fully formed, a memory of things he had not yet lived. The smell came first, wine and wet stone and the sweetness beneath both, roasting meat, and under all of it something red and wrong that he couldn't name, and didn't need to. A hall. The sound of lutes somewhere he couldn't see. Men laughing. A man with a gray beard sitting at a high table raising a cup, then the sound. A sharp, flat sound, like nothing he had a word for, like leather being punched from the inside. Then that sound again, and again. And a silence after it that felt like being held under water. A hand on his shoulder. He thought, Mother, he thought it the way you think things when dreaming, certain without reason, bedrock true. He turned to look. The hand was not his mother's. The ceiling. He was looking at the ceiling, and the ceiling was very far away. Cold then. Pure cold at the base of his throat, the kind that does not come from air or stone or winter, but from the complete stopping of something that should not stop. He understood, in the vision's last second, with the clarity that only came when the body already knew what the mind was not yet willing to accept, that the cold was him. Grey Wind hit him in the chest before he could scream. 140 pounds of direwolf launched from a dead sleep, and Robb came up off the bedroll gasping with the wolf on top of him, both of them breathing too fast, both of them shaking. He could feel the animal's heart through its ribs, not through the fur but through the ribs themselves, a drumbeat so fast it should have been impossible in something that large. Grey Wind pressed his face against Robb's neck and made the sound again. The low, wrong sound, the one that meant, I know. I know. Robb lay on his back on the stone floor, with his wolf on his chest, for a very long time. He found the weirwood before the sky was light. Moat Cailin's godswood was not what anyone would call a godswood, a single weirwood, half cracked at the base, its roots so old and far-reaching they had worked themselves into the masonry of the south wall and were slowly pulling it apart. A tree dismantling a fortress through patience alone, century by century. As if the fortress had been an imposition the tree intended to correct. The carved face was crude. Whoever had put it there had done it long before carving became art. 2 rough hollows for eyes, a slash for a mouth, the whole thing smoothed by centuries of rain into something almost formless. Almost. Robb sat with his back against the root and pressed his hands flat against the stone. He did not pray. He didn't know what he would have said. He sat in the dark, and he listed them instead, one by one, in the slow, methodical way of a mind that had, overnight, gone from 15 years old to something with no easy name. Roose Bolton, Walder Frey, Edmure and the Stone Mill, the Karstarks, a feast at the twins that smelled of wine and something red. He listed them, and he did not weep. He had always known, somewhere in the making of himself, that he was not built for the weeping kind of grief. He was built for the other kind, the kind that goes quiet and gets to work. By the time the sky turned gray, he had a list. By the time pale gold touched the eastern edge, he had something more than a list. He had an order of operations. His mother found him there. She always came first. That was Catelyn Stark's particular gift, arriving before anyone else had gathered themselves, carrying the morning with her like a practical thing to be sorted. She crossed the godswood with her cloak pulled close, and her hair already neat, which meant she had slept very little, and she had a list of her own. She always did. "The Great Jon wants to know if you'll march the Western Road or the Causeway." She stopped. "Robb," he looked up at her. She said nothing for a moment. He watched her read his face the way she had always read his face, the way mothers do, past the surface and into the machinery behind it. He watched her read it and find something she hadn't expected to find. "What happened?" "I had a dream," he said. She came and sat beside him on the root. Not touching. She always knew when touching helped and when it was the wrong instrument, a bad one. He looked at his mother. He looked at her the way he would look at her for the rest of his life, now that he knew what he knew, as the woman who would, if he did nothing about it, ride south in 4 months and release Jaime Lannister from a camp at Riverrun without his permission. Not out of treachery, out of love, which was a different kind of problem entirely, and in some ways a harder one. He was not angry. He didn't know exactly what the feeling was, something sad and careful and too large for the space he currently had to put it. "I'm all right," he said. "Tell the Great Jon the march route waits until tomorrow. There's something I need to settle first." She looked at him for a long time. "You're not frightened," she said. "Not quite a question. No, you should be. It's a hard road south. I know the road." He said it before he thought about saying it, and the moment the words were out, he heard them the way she heard them, flat and certain in a way that a 15-year-old lord had no right to be. Her expression shifted. Something moved behind her eyes that he couldn't fully read, and he realized, with a small, quiet shock, that this was new. He had always been able to read his mother. She left him the way she had come. He noticed, without surprise, that he had not asked what she thought he should do. The lords convened at mid-morning in the largest intact tower, a high room of damp stone and smoky rushlight where the next cold came through the walls regardless of the fire. They arrived the way northern lords arrived everywhere, armored out of habit, loud, dragging chairs across stone as if furniture were an opponent. The Great Jon was on his feet before the council formally opened. "My lord." His voice filled the room from the bottom, the way it always did. "It is past time to name you what you are. Your bannermen are ready. Your men are ready. Every man in this host followed you out of the north for one reason, and that reason is standing right there. Give us the word and we will." "Not yet," Robb said. The room went still. The Great Jon's mouth closed. He had the look of a man who has extended his hand for something he expected to be placed in it and found the hand empty. Around the table the lords exchanged glances. Glover, Tallheart, Karstark, old Lord Rickard's gray brows pulled low, and no one spoke, because Robb was still talking. He laid out 3 objectives. He was specific. He spoke about the twins in the Green Fork and the disposition of the Lannister host without notes, without hesitation, in the measured voice of someone who knows the ground because he has already fought over it and counted his dead. He did not perform confidence. He simply had it, which was a different thing entirely. And the lords in that room were old enough to know the difference. They listened. Men who had ridden south behind a boy lord sat and listened to something that was not quite a boy lord. When the council ended and the men filed out into the wet gray morning, Robb touched his steward's arm. "Send word to Lord Roose Bolton," he said quietly. "A private meeting. The Heart Tree. Tonight," he said it the way he might say, "saddle the horse, or bring me water." His steward nodded and went. Robb stood at the tower's window and looked out at the neck, at the black water and the pale reeds, and the ancient sky pressing down on all of it. He thought of a feast that had not happened yet. He thought of a hand on his shoulder that had not been his mother's. The northern host had arrived at Moat Cailin with a boy captain. It would leave with something else. The godswood at night smelled of root water and old stone, and the particular cold of a place that has not been warm in centuries. Robb had asked for no torches, one at the tree line where his men stood, one at the weirwood's base where he sat. And the effect was a darkness so complete that the heart tree's face was only partially visible, one carved eye catching the flame, the other swallowed in shadow. Grey wind lay behind him, pressed against the root. Not standing, not alert in any obvious way, simply present, the slow rise and fall of his breathing the only sound in the godswood, besides the wind. Robb heard Roose Bolton before he saw him. Not footsteps. Roose Bolton did not make noise when he walked, which was one of the first things the Northern Lord said about him, usually in a tone that was almost admiration. What Robb heard was the cessation of sound, the small nocturnal movements of the bog, the insects and the settling stone. Going quiet in a ring that moved ahead of the man like water ahead of a boat. The neck knew he was coming. The neck had always been better at threat assessment than people. Roose Bolton stepped from the darkness into the torchlight and paused. He took in the scene with eyes the color of old ice, pale and very still, and not missing anything. Robb seated at the root. The wolf behind him. The two men at the far tree line, visible just enough to be a fact and not visible enough to be a threat unless you already knew they were a threat. Roose's gaze moved over all of it in a single unhurried circuit. Then he crossed the godswood and sat on the flat stone Robb had left for the purpose, and arranged his cloak over his knees with the careful attention of a man settling in for a long, unremarkable conversation. "My lord," he said. His voice was what it always was, barely above a murmur, each word placed as if it had been considered and found acceptable before being released. A private meeting. "Thank you for coming," Robb said. Roose inclined his head. "Waiting, I've been thinking about our ravens," Robb said. "Wartime generates a great deal of correspondence. I wondered if Lord Bolton's maester had been kept busy. All our maesters are busy. The war requires it. Of course." A pause. "Tywin Lannister moves quickly. You need current intelligence to understand what he's doing." "That is correct." "What do you make of him?" Robb asked. "Lord Tywin, as a commander." Roose was quiet for a moment, not the silence of a man who doesn't know the answer, but of a man selecting which answer to give. "He is thorough," he said finally. "He does not leave problems alive behind him. He understands that the cost of sentiment in war is measured in bodies." A pause so brief it was almost not a pause. "I respect him." "I thought you might," Robb said. Something shifted. Not in Roose Bolton's face. He was not a man whose face could be read by any ordinary method. In the hands. A very small stillness that replaced the already considerable stillness that had been there before. A stillness inside a stillness. He had begun to understand where this was going. Robb did not move. "I know what you planned to offer him," he said. "The terms you had arranged in your mind, the correspondence you were preparing, the shape of the agreement you were going to send south." He paused. "I know the night you had chosen to do it. I know the specific word you planned to use when describing me in the letter." The torchlight moved between them. The next wind came through the gap in the ancient wall and touched the flame and let it go. "That is not information," Roose said, very quietly, "that exists anywhere a spy could find it." "No." A pause. "The old gods showed you," Roose said. Not a question. "The old gods showed me enough." Roose Bolton was silent for a long time. Not afraid. Robb understood this with a certainty that had nothing to do with the vision. Roose had spent his whole life managing fear the way other men managed cattle, contained, directed, turned to useful purpose. What he was doing now was calculating. Running the numbers in whatever cold space behind those pale eyes housed the machinery of him. Robb waited until the calculation was finished. He could see the moment it concluded, in the almost invisible relaxation of Roose's shoulders, the specific look of a man who has arrived at a number and does not like it. "Shall I send for a maester?" Roose said. "Or will this be done here?" "Here," Robb said. "My father taught me. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword." Roose Bolton looked at him for a moment with those colorless eyes. Then he nodded once, as if Robb had said something he found unexpectedly reasonable. He did not beg. He did not bargain. He did not raise his voice, because Roose Bolton had never raised his voice in his life and saw no cause to make his last act the exception. It was quick. Robb had been trained by the best swordmaster in the North, and he had inherited the Stark understanding of what a sword was for, not performance, not punishment, not the prolonged ceremony that some lords seem to believe justice required. A blade is a tool. Use it cleanly. Roose Bolton died without a sound, which seemed, in the end, correct. Grey Wind did not move. By the time the sky began to pale, Roose's most senior officers had been quietly separated from their men and brought, one at a time, to a chamber in the second tower. They came, expecting orders. They received instead the news that their lord had died in the night, a sickness of the heart, sudden and complete. The man delivering this news was calm. He communicated nothing except the boredom of a man stating routine facts. The officers looked at each other. The youngest asked about the Castellan. He was told the matter was being handled. He was told their men were needed, their experience valued. The king in the north appreciated their loyalty to the cause. The words king in the north had not been spoken officially yet. Robb used them anyway, deliberately, and watched the officers hear them. They swore before they left the room. Men conditioned to obey power can redirect that obedience faster than men who follow out of love. Robb had known this from the vision. He found it true, and found it cold. Fast riders left for the Dreadfort before the first cook fire was lit. Catelyn came at breakfast. She stood in his doorway and her face told him she already knew something. Word had moved faster than he'd planned for. Roose Bolton died in the night, she said. Yes, Robb. The old gods showed me something, he said. About Lord Bolton. About what he had decided. She was a woman of the faith, raised with the southern gods. The Tully light carried inside her like a lamp that never went fully dark. Weirwood trees were her husband's business. She had never entirely understood the North's relationship with the old magic, and she understood now, looking at her son, that she was standing on the outside of it. She crossed the room. She looked at his face from close, the searching look she'd used since he was small, the one that had never failed to find what it was looking for. This time, it found something she had no name for. "Are you all right?" she asked. "No," Robb said. "But I'm decided. That's more useful right now." She left without arguing, which was not like her. He understood that whatever she'd found in his face had told her something she wasn't ready to answer. Among the lords, the fear moved the way cold moves, through every gap, into every corner, regardless of rank. Not the fear that follows a leader who has made a hard decision. Something older, less comfortable, the fear of men raised on old gods' stories who were now standing next to the man the old gods had apparently chosen to speak to. They did not celebrate, they recalculated. In a chamber at the Dreadfort that smelled of kennels and old leather, a young man with pale eyes received a raven that bore no seal. He read it twice. He fed it to one of his dogs. The dog ate it without interest. The young man looked out the narrow window at the flat gray sky above the moors, and said nothing, and thought a great many things, and the door to his chamber stayed closed for a long time afterward. The northern host left Moat Cailin 3 days later. It moved south with unusual discipline, quieter than 18,000 men had any right to be. Its columns tighter, its pace steadier, its lord at the center with a grey wolf at his heel, and his father's teaching at his back. The small folk along the causeway watched it pass. Later, in the weeks and months that followed, they would describe what they had seen in different words that amounted to the same thing: a boy who knew where he was going. Not because someone had shown him a map, because he had already, in some way no one could explain, returned from there. 3 weeks on the Causeway Road taught the northern host a new kind of quiet. It was not the quiet of men at ease. It was the quiet of men who had recalculated something and had not yet finished working out the implications. They marched in tighter columns than before, spoke at lower volumes around the fires, and kept their eyes on the grey direwolf moving at their lord's heel, with the specific attention of men who have decided that watching something closely might tell them what it is. Robb did not explain himself. He gave orders, he took reports, he rode the length of the column twice daily in the way his father had taught him. The lords came to him with questions, and he answered them. What he did not do was account for what had happened at Moat Cailin's heart tree. The old gods did not require explanation any more than the winter required justification. They were simply facts of the North, and in the North facts did not argue for themselves. On the 19th day, the fog came. The twins appeared through it the way old things appear through fog, slowly, without drama. Each stone resolving from gray into gray-brown into detail, until the two castles stood fully present on either bank, with the Green Fork running dark and cold between them. They were identical in the way that mirrors are identical, each one watching its reflection across the water, and from every tower the Frey banners hung motionless in the still air, twin blue towers on gray, announcing through the fog that the toll gate was occupied, and had been occupied for centuries, and intended to remain so. They had been watching since the Outriders appeared 2 hours ago. Robb could see them in the windows, not men exactly, just the dark shapes of men, perfectly still, and he understood that what they were counting was not soldiers, but leverage. Every Frey lord from the eldest to the least calculated in terms of what he was owed, and right now what the twins were owed was a great deal. In the original reckoning, he had paid it with a daughter he never married. He had paid it with a promise he broke, and then with his own blood, and his mother's, and Edmure's, and the blood of every man in his host who ate that bread and drank that wine, and trusted that the ancient law of guest right meant something in a hall full of Freys. He stood at his cavalry's head with that memory, someone else's memory, dropped into his chest from a tree's hollow eye, and considered the old man in the castle. "Send a rider," he said to his steward. "My lord." The terms, not terms, a request. Robb looked at the bridge. It ran between the two castles over the Green Fork, wide enough for 4 horses abreast, its stones old enough that the mortar between them had gone to powder in places, and been replaced so many times the repairs were older than most lordships in the Riverlands. A private audience with Lord Walder. The midpoint of the bridge. No guards from either side. Just the two of us and wine. His wine, if he prefers, I'll drink whatever he pours. His steward took this in without comment, which was the mark of a good steward. He sent the rider. The rider came back in under an hour. Lord Frey would see him. Walder Frey was smaller than the songs. Not shorter. He had been tall once. The frame was still there under the furs and the slack of extreme age, but compressed. Somehow. As if 90 years of sitting on a chair that was never quite comfortable had slowly pressed him downward. He sat in a wheeled chair on the bridge's midpoint, with a granddaughter behind each handle, and 2 heavy wool blankets over his knees despite the mild air, and he watched Robb approach with eyes that were the sharpest thing left on his face. The granddaughter stepped back at Robb's gesture. His own men were already at the bridge's northern end, far enough to be a statement rather than a presence. "My Lord Stark." Walder Frey's voice had the quality of something damp, not unpleasant exactly, but worn, like Riverstone, or should I say, my lord, nothing yet. "You've not been crowned." "Not yet," Robb said. He sat in the chair that had been placed across from Walder's, at eye level, not standing, deliberately, and accepted the cup of arbor gold that a boy brought and poured without being asked. Walder Frey watched him drink it. "You're young," the old lord said. "Yes, your grandfather Hoster was young when he came to me too. Needed men for the Ninpenny Kings. Very polite about it, very respectful." A pause. "Never came back to the twins once the war was done. None of them do." Robb said nothing. He let this sit. Walder Frey had been saying some version of this sentence for 60 years, and the sentence had never gone anywhere because the men he said it to were always looking past it toward what they needed from him. Robb was looking at him. "I didn't come to the Trident until the battle was finished," Walder said. Not ashamed. Aware there was a difference. Everyone has a name for that. The late Lord Frey. The words came out flat and old, a phrase turned so many times in the mouth it had worn smooth, as if a man who waits to see which way a thing falls before he commits his sons to it is somehow lesser than the fools who committed them wrong. "It's what I would have done," Robb said, "if I didn't already know how it was going to fall." Walder Frey looked at him. "And how is this one going to fall?" "I'll tell you," Robb said, "and then I'll tell you what I want from you, and then you'll tell me if the price is fair. Go on then." Robb set his cup down. "Within the year, Jaime Lannister will be my prisoner. Within the year after that, Tywin Lannister will lose control of the Riverlands. The Iron Throne will pass from Joffrey Baratheon, who is not Robert's son, and whose claim will be proven illegitimate before a great council, to a man with a blood right no one can argue with. This war ends. Not in 10 years, not in 5, within the year. He paused. I have intelligence you don't have access to. You can decide how much weight to give it. Walder Frey was quiet for a long moment. His hands on the arms of his chair were heavily veined, the skin gone translucent enough to see the rivers beneath it. Bold claims, he said. Accurate ones. You're 15 years old. 15-year-olds can still read a campaign correctly. Robb picked up his cup again. My lord, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm not here to tell you what happens to houses that back the wrong side. You know that better than I do, and you've made a study of avoiding it. I'm here because when this is over, there will be a reckoning of who helped and who extracted. The lords who let the rightful king pass, and the lords who stood in his way arguing about terms. Walder Frey made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not the real one. Not yet. And what exactly are your terms, boy? No daughter, Robb said. Silence. I beg your pardon, Walder said. You heard me. No betrothal, no marriage pact. I'm not going to promise you a Stark husband for a Frey girl and then break the promise when I fall in love with someone unsuitable, because I've seen what that promise costs. He kept his voice even. What I'm offering instead is gold, a figure we can agree on today. Payable from the Stark treasury when the war ends, which it will. A formal role in the governance of the Riverlands once they're secure. A justiciar's position with real authority, not a courtesy title. And a written guarantee, sealed with my blood at Riverrun's heart tree, that House Frey will be recognized as a house that stood with the true king when it mattered. He leaned forward slightly. You don't want a daughter married into the north, my lord. You want someone of consequence to look at House Frey and not look away. Those are different things. I'm offering you the second one. Walder Frey looked at him for a very long time. His eyes moved over Robb's face with the slow attention of a man reading fine print. They stopped, briefly, on his hands, the hands that were not yet a man's hands, that had nonetheless just sat across from a lord of 90 years and named his actual want back to him, correctly, without sentiment. The laugh came without warning. It was exactly as the vision had rendered it, wet and old and containing no warmth, the laugh of a man whose amusement was archaeological. Dug up from very deep, it shook his chest and made the blankets shift and went on long enough that the granddaughters exchanged a glance behind his chair. Boy, Walder Frey said, when he could speak, pour yourself more wine. He waved at the granddaughter. Bring the bottle. 18,000 men crossed the Green Fork at the Twins before dark. The current ran black beneath the bridge, cold with snowmelt from far north, indifferent to what passed above it. On the south bank, the Riverlands opened ahead, greener than the north, softer, the sky wider without the neck's press of tree-line and bog. The ground was damp but passable. The road ran straight. Robb rode across without looking back. He owed Walder Frey gold, and a title, and a guarantee written in blood. He owed him nothing that could be served at a feast. The Whispering Wood earned its name not from wind, but from the way sound moved through it, sideways, bent, arriving from the wrong direction so that a man could hear his own name and not know whether it came from ahead or behind. Oak and elm so old their canopies had closed into a single ceiling, cutting out the stars, cutting out the moon, leaving a darkness so complete that after the first mile the only navigation was the roots underfoot, and the warmth of horses breathing on either side. 2,000 northern cavalry, standing still. Not a horse stamping, not a man coughing. Not the shift and clink of iron that always accompanied men in armor when they were given time to think. Robb had told them, before they entered the wood, exactly what he had told them at Moat Cailin: trust the timing. He had told them where the Lannisters were, which side of the eastern slope they'd left unwatched. Why? He had told them what to do when the signal came. He had not told them how he knew. They hadn't asked. That was the thing Moat Cailin had done, the thing the Heart Tree and Roose Bolton and 3 weeks of an army marching quieter than armies march had done to these men. They had stopped asking how Robb Stark knew what he knew, and started asking only, what do you need us to do? Grey wind stood at the cavalry's head, and was still. Ahead, through 200 yards of dark, the Lannister camp burned with torches. They had placed them along the western edge of their perimeter, which was where any sensible attack would come from. Open ground, clear sight lines, the approach a cavalry commander would choose if he didn't know the eastern slope existed, or had decided the tree line was too dense to push through. The pickets on the east were 3 men who had drawn the short straw, positioned as a formality against an approach their officers didn't believe in. The torches were pointed the wrong way. 2,000 men waited in the dark with the specific patience of men who have been told the exact moment to move and believe in the man who told them. Robb raised his hand. Grey Wind went first. The direwolf hit the picket line before the horses did, and then the horses were moving, and there was no more quiet, not silence breaking, which was a thing that happened gently, but silence ending the way a bone ends when it meets a floor, and the whispering wood filled with a sound that had no single name, because it was made of too many things at once, hooves and iron and men finding breath only, long enough to lose it. The Lannister camp did not form. That was the word Robb had used beforehand, the specific word his father had taught him, form. A force that cannot form cannot fight as a force. It can only fight as a collection of individuals, and a collection of individuals in the dark against cavalry, already moving, is not a battle. It is a sequence of isolated pockets of violence. Each one over before the man beside it begins. He rode in the center. He had argued with his mother about this 3 days ago, and had not won the argument so much as simply stated what was going to happen, and ended the discussion. He was 15 and he was the commander, and he was not going to watch from a ridge while his men fought in his name. Grey Wind ran 10 yards ahead of his horse, which meant that men saw the wolf first, a gray shape that should not move that fast, that should not exist in this darkness, that should not be running toward them as if the darkness itself had grown a spine. And then the horses arrived, and by then the moment for organized response had already passed. It lasted 19 minutes. Robb did not count them. He learned the number later from his steward. They found Renly Lannister at the base of an elm tree with his back to the bark and 4 northern soldiers on the ground in front of him. He was still standing. This was the detail that required a moment to process, not that Renly Lannister was capable of it. Because Robb knew what Jaime Lannister was capable of from men who had fought alongside him and men who had fought against him, but that he had chosen to stand rather than run, and that choice had cost him considerably. Blood on his sword arm, a cut above his left eye that had closed that eye to a slit, his golden armor catching the torchlight in the way that golden armor always caught torchlight. Indiscriminately bright, as if the metal itself hadn't absorbed the information about how badly this had gone. The circle of northern soldiers around him was not moving. They had formed it instinctively, 9 men with swords at angles, and not one of them was willing to be the one who stepped forward. Not because they were afraid, exactly, because of the 4 men on the ground. Robb rode into the clearing and stopped. Jaime Lannister looked at him across the circle. He had green eyes, which was not information Robb needed, and which he noted anyway, green and very clear, despite the cut above the left one, despite everything. The eyes of a man who has spent his whole life watching things happen quickly and assessing them faster. They moved over Robb's face with the speed of a blade finding gaps in armor. "You knew where to find me," Jaime said. His voice was even. Not the evenness of calm, the evenness of a man who has decided that evenness is now his only remaining position. "I knew a great many things about tonight," Robb said. A pause. Jaime looked at the circle of men. He looked at Grey Wind sitting at Robb's horse's left shoulder like a second shadow. He did the calculation, the same calculation Roose Bolton had done at the Heart Tree, though arriving at it from a very different position, and lowered his sword. "Well," Jaime Lannister said, "you're shorter than I expected." At dawn a raven arrived from Galbart Glover. Robb read it at the tree line, standing, while behind him his men worked with the specific, quiet efficiency of soldiers after an engagement, seeing to horses, seeing to wounds, seeing to the other things that needed seeing to after cavalry meets men who haven't drawn swords yet. Glover's message was short and specific. The Lannister camp near Oxcross had been taken before the sentries woke. The western force was destroyed as a fighting formation. He folded the message. He stood at the tree line and looked west, at the dark and the oaks closing in. Somewhere past them, the Westerlands. Somewhere past them, Casterly Rock, where Tywin Lannister had built his family from a name into a dynasty through methods that would be producing ravens back to Harrenhal by midday. 2 ravens. Arriving from different directions, landing in the same room, he knew what Tywin would do with them. He had always known what Tywin did with information that narrowed his options. The man went still, not paralyzed, never paralyzed. Stillness for Tywin Lannister was not absence, but concentration, a drawing inward of all the calculating machinery before it produced the next move. He would hold at Harrenhal. He would reassess. He would look for the weakness he'd missed. He would not find it quickly. Robb put the message inside his cloak and went to find his captive. They had put Jaime in a tent that was larger than strictly necessary, not comfort, but acknowledgement. He sat on a camp chair with his wrists in chains that were good quality, not punitive, and looked up when Robb entered with the expression of a man who has decided the most useful thing he can do is observe. Robb sat across from him. He did not bring guards inside. He brought food, which Jaime looked at and did not immediately touch, and wine, which Jaime also did not touch. "You're either very confident," Jaime said, "or very young." "Both," Robb said. He poured 2 cups and pushed one across the table and drank from his own before Jaime could decide what to make of the gesture. After a moment, Jaime drank. "I know about Eris," Robb said. Jaime was still. "I know what he was planning to do. The wildfire beneath the city, the caches in the storerooms, under the sept, beneath the Red Keep's own foundations. I know you killed him to stop it." A pause. "I know what it cost you." The silence in the tent had a different quality than the silence in the Whispering Wood. Compressed full, "Everyone knows I killed him," Jaime said. "Everyone knows you killed him. Nobody knows why." Robb looked at him. "I know why. And I'm not telling you this to make you feel something. I'm telling you because what I know about you is going to determine what I ask of you. And I want you to understand that I'm not asking from ignorance." Jaime set his cup down. He looked at Robb with the green eyes that had been watching and assessing since the elm tree, since the circle of 9 soldiers, since a 15-year-old on horseback looked down at him and said, "I knew a great many things about tonight." "You want a confession," Jaime said. "I want a letter," Robb said. "Written in your hand. To your sister." The tent was very quiet. "She won't release your father for a letter," Jaime said. "That's not what the letter's for." Robb leaned forward slightly. "The letter is for Stannis Baratheon. Written to your sister in your own hand, saying what you both know is true. A man can deny a rumor. He cannot deny his own words to the person he said them with." Jaime looked at him for a long moment. The calculation moved behind his eyes, not the quick blade-finding calculation of the battlefield, but the slower, colder arithmetic of a man who has been carrying a particular weight for 14 years and is being asked, for the first time, whether he wants to set it down. "And if I write it," Jaime said, "what does that make you?" "Someone who used the truth as a tool," Robb said. "I can live with that." Outside the tent, the Whispering Wood held its sounds sideways and strange, carrying the noise of an army managing its aftermath in every direction at once. The Lannister Western campaign was finished. Tywin Lannister at Harrenhal was going very still. And in a tent in a forest that bent sound and confused direction, a young lord and a golden captive sat across a camp table and negotiated the shape of a truth that had been buried for 14 years. Riverrune's rookery sat at the top of the eastern tower, and the smell of it reached you 3 steps before you arrived, old wood and dark feathers, and the sharpness of birds in close quarters. Living and watching, and indifferent to everything below them except the patterns of light and dark that told them when to sleep. The maester offered to write for him. Robb said no. He sat at the narrow table the maester used for correspondence and wrote 4 letters in his own hand, the quill making the small, specific sound of careful work, the candle burning down in stages as the night went. Gray wind lay across the doorway. Below, River Rune breathed around them, boots on stone, the distant water against the castle's foundations, where the red fork and the tumblestone met beneath the walls, the sound of a garrison resettling after weeks of siege. The first letter was the shortest. He addressed it to Cersei Lannister, Queen Regent, King's Landing. He wrote, "I hold your brother. I have proof of what you are. Release my father, alive, unhurt, to the Night's Watch at Castle Black within 10 days. For every day past 10, your brother loses something he cannot replace." He wrote it without anger, because anger was not the point. The point was specific pressure applied to a specific place. Whether Cersei responded or did not would tell him something he needed to know about how much latitude Joffrey's handlers still had over Joffrey. He folded it, set it aside. The second letter was the most complicated to deliver. It could not go directly. King's Landing's rookery fell under the Gold Cloak captain's jurisdiction, and Gold Cloak captains answered to whoever currently controlled the gold. So it went first to Castle Black, which had a raven chain to every major castle in Westeros, including a relay maester in Rosby, whose counterpart maester in King's Landing was apolitical in the way that very old maesters were apolitical, loyal to the Citadel's ideal of information as a neutral instrument. Not yet compromised by Lannister gold. From Rosby to the Keep. The message at the end of that chain, stripped of its framing, said, "Do not confess. Do not bend the knee. Help is coming before the moon turns." He signed it not with his name, but with a direwolf drawn freehand, its lines the particular lines he had been drawing since he was old enough to hold a quill. He folded it, set it aside. The third letter took the longest. He had been writing it in his head for 3 weeks. Since the Whispering Wood, since the tent and the camp table, and Jaime Lannister's green eyes doing their calculating across the distance of a flask of wine. He had Jaime's letter already, 6 paragraphs in the Kingslayer's controlled, precise hand, witnessed by Robb's maester, and sealed separately. And he set it beside his own draft and wrote around it, who he was, what he had, what he proposed. He did not flatter. He did not apologize for being 15. He wrote about Joffrey's illegitimacy and the evidence behind it, about Ned Stark's testimony and Jaime's confession, and the chain of documentation Jon Arryn had assembled before his death. He wrote about the Blackwater, not in detail, nothing that would reveal how he knew, but enough. Do not attack until I confirm I am positioned north of the city. We strike together or we do not strike at all, and if we do not strike together, you lose. He wrote the last line in the same flat register as everything else, because Stannis Baratheon was not a man who responded to drama. He was a man who responded to information presented correctly. At the bottom he wrote, "My father is in the black cells, because he found what you found. I cannot save him without you buying me time. You cannot win without me buying you a northern front. Neither of us has a choice about this. I would rather that were the foundation of our alliance than pretend it is something warmer." He included Jaime's letter in the same sealed package. He folded it, set it aside. The fourth letter was 3 sentences to Jon Snow at Castle Black. "Stay, whatever comes south, stay. Watch what is on the other side of the wall, not the wildlings, and write me what you see." He folded it, set all 4 in a row and looked at them in the candlelight. Grey Wind raised his head from the doorway and put it back down. Robb sent them before the maester's candle burned to nothing. 8 days later, in a study at Dragonstone that smelled of salt and cold stone, and the particular damp of a castle built to look like something alive and terrible, Stannis Baratheon read Robb Stark's letter twice. Davos Seaworth read it over his shoulder. This was a liberty Stannis permitted in Davos and no one else, not from sentiment, but from the recognition that Davos had a talent for reading the underneath of things that Stannis' own mind sometimes moved past too quickly. Stannis set the letter down. He picked up Jaime Lannister's confession and read it 3 times. "He's 15, Stannis said. "He's winning," Davos said. Stannis set the confession beside the letter and aligned their edges, which was the thing his hands did when his mind needed a moment it wouldn't ask for. He looked at the 2 documents sitting flush against each other, Jaime Lannister's precise lettering confirming in writing what Stannis had known for years, what had cost Jon Arryn his life, what had cost Ned Stark his freedom, what Robert Baratheon had died without knowing. He crossed to the window. Dragonstone faced the Blackwater Bay, and on a clear day this window showed you the distant haze above King's Landing, the brownish particular smear that 500,000 people generated simply by existing, cooking and burning and breathing in a city that had never asked to be as large as it was. Today was clear. The bay ran gray-green under a high autumn sky, and the haze sat above the southern horizon like something waiting. "He says not to attack until he's north of the city," Davos said. "I can read. He's right, though. The chain at the harbor mouth has been reinforced for a week. We go in now without the northern threat. They hold us at the Blackwater until Tywin marches." Stannis did not turn from the window. "I know." The bay held his attention for a while longer. Then he said, "Tell the captains we are sailing to the mouth of the Blackwater. Not to attack. A pause. To be seen. I want Cersei to count our sails before she sleeps." He walked back to the table and picked up Robb Stark's letter. He found the line he was looking for, "Neither of us has a choice about this," and read it once more in the register it had been written in. Flat, accurate, without performance. "Write back," he said. "What shall I say?" Stannis set the letter down. "Received and understood. I will hold position until his ravens confirm readiness." He was quiet for a moment. Tell him his father would have been a useful man. The answer to Robb's Cersei letter did not come from Cersei. What came instead was a raven, 10 days after the rookery, describing an announcement from the Iron Throne. The traitor Eddard Stark would face justice before the people of King's Landing, the date to be set within the fortnight. The announcement had been made from the throne room with the court assembled, in Joffrey Baratheon's own voice, before Cersei could intercede, or Tyrion could manage the politics, or anyone with a longer view could explain to the boy what martyrs were for. Robb read the raven at the window of the eastern tower in the early morning, while Riverrun was still finding its feet below him. He stood at the window and looked at the dark water where the two rivers joined. He had known this would happen. The vision had not shown him Cersei stopping Joffrey, it had shown him Joffrey, which meant Joffrey was not stoppable by the people currently in the room with him. He had built for this specific failure. He had a second move. And the second move required not a maester's hand but his own, and not a castle rookery but a different kind of messenger entirely. He sat at the table and wrote one more letter. He addressed it to no house, no castle, no name that appeared in any formal record. He marked it only with a small drawing in the corner of the wax seal. A spider. 8 legs rendered in the quick shorthand of a man who has drawn it once to practice and once to use. A signal that a message in a chain 3 removes long had described to him as one that certain correspondents in King's Landing still recognized. He was not certain Varys would respond. He was not certain Varys was the thing people described. The spider at the center who pulled threads rather than cut them, who preferred a living useful piece to a dead symbolic one. He was not certain of anything about the Master of Whisperers except this: Varys had tried to save his father and had failed. And men who tried to save people and failed were not finished trying. He wrote, "I know you were trying to save him. I know you failed. Tell me, what is the simplest path that leaves Ned Stark alive?" He folded it. He sealed it. He sat for a moment in the smell of the rookery, old wood, dark feathers, 60 ravens watching from their cages, with the flat attention of creatures who have never confused a message with the truth it carries. Then he sent it south, and waited to see if the spider wrote back. Harrenhal was a bad castle in the way that certain truths are bad, too large to be comfortable, too visible to be ignored, built to an ambition that had outrun the builder's lifetime and left posterity to manage the consequences. Tywin Lannister had chosen it for exactly those qualities. He stood at the window of the high chamber at the top of the Kingspire Tower. The tallest of Harrenhal's 5 surviving towers, its stone warped in places where Balerion's fire had kissed the walls 2 centuries past, when Aegon the Conqueror ended the Ironborn kingdom in a single afternoon. The smell of that old burning still present in cold weather, if you knew what you were looking for, and held 2 ravens in his hands. He opened the first, read it, set it down. He opened the second, read it, set it beside the first. He did not move after that for 1 minute and 40 seconds, which was the span of time his personal maester had learned to wait before speaking. The maester had served him 20 years. The maester did not speak. Tywin set both ravens on the campaign table, aligned their edges, and crossed to the maps. He put his finger on Oxcross. He put his finger on the Whispering Wood. He moved his finger to Harrenhal, where the finger currently stood. "Send riders to the Red Fork fords," he said. "Every crossing point. Current reports." "My lord." The maester went. Tywin stood at the window. The riverlands outside were green-brown with late autumn, the sky high and pale and offering nothing. He began, with great methodical precision, to construct his next move. He had not yet run out of moves. He was not the kind of man who ran out of moves. But the moves had narrowed, and a narrowed set of moves was a thing Tywin Lannister registered the way other men registered pain, not by crying out, but by going very still and thinking faster. Edmure Tully had his uncle's jaw and his father's temper, and a gift for being right about tactical questions at exactly the wrong strategic moment. He had drawn the stone mill ford on the camp table at River Run with confident strokes. He knew every crossing on the Red Fork, had learned them as a boy riding with his father's household guard. Catalogued them and understood them the way a man understands the rooms of a house he grew up in. He pointed at the ford and laid out exactly why it mattered. The stone mill on the north bank gave sheltered ground to any defending force. The ford itself was narrow enough that 1,000 men could hold it against 5,000. The river was running high with autumn rain which compressed the viable crossing window to a matter of hours on either side of midday. He was entirely correct about all of it. "I know," Robb said. "Then you know we have to hold it." Edmure looked up from the table. He was 15 years older than Robb, brown-haired and broad-faced, with the look of a man who had spent months defending a besieged castle and was not accustomed to finding his expertise insufficient. "If Clegane crosses there, I need them to cross there." "Silence, Lord Stark." Robb. Edmure took one measured breath. The villages on the north bank, 3 settlements, farmers, families who have been burned out twice already this campaign. If Clegane's column comes through the stone mill ford, those villages go. "I know. Then you can't ask me to. I'm going to," Robb said. "And I need you to let it happen, and not move." The words sat between them on the camp table, beside the charcoal marks of the ford and the mill, and the 3 small circles representing 3 villages. And Edmure looked at them, and then at Robb, with the expression of a man who has discovered the person he is negotiating with is operating from a different set of values than he assumed. "They're my people," Edmure said. Quietly, the volume of genuine feeling, not performed indignation. "I know that too." Robb held his gaze. "What I know that you don't, what I'm asking you to trust me on, is that if Tywin cannot cross here, he finds another ford. He comes at our flank while our cavalry is elsewhere, and that crossing costs us everything that cannot be replaced." He paused. 3 villages. 3 burned villages, and Tywin's main army crosses into ground I've been preparing for 2 weeks. We win this. The riverlands stop burning. Everything your father built stops bleeding. Edmure's jaw had gone tight enough to show the muscle working. "Or we hold the stone mill," Robb continued. "We win a ford. We spend 100 men to delay him long enough to hurt us worse. You're asking me to watch. I'm asking you to position your 5,000 on the south bank and wait for my signal. That is not watching. That is the most important part of what happens in 2 days." Edmure looked at the map for a long time. His hands on the table's edge were white at the knuckles. "If you're wrong," he said, "I know. I will say it every day for the rest of my life." "I know that too," Robb said. "I hope you get the chance." Gregor Clegane's column crossed the stone mill ford at dusk and found evacuated villages. Not abandoned, prepared, hearth fires cold, livestock gone, food stores taken. The absence had a quality to it. The difference between a house whose family left in a hurry and a house whose family had time to take everything worth keeping. The mountain noted this. He burned the buildings anyway, because that was the order, and because the message was the burning regardless of the audience. His riders went north looking for northern positions. They found road churn from a large force moving south. They found no army. The report went back to Harrenhal. The north bank was clear. Robb Stark had pulled toward Riverrun. Tywin read this report at his campaign table. He thought about Oxcross. He thought about the Whispering Wood. He thought about 3 things he had not anticipated, each executed correctly, and he sat with the narrowing of options until only one remained. He ordered the crossing. The Red Fork was cold and running fast, autumn heavy with rain from the western hills, and Tywin's vanguard was 300 yards into it when Edmure Tully's 5,000 came over the South Bank's ridge. They came at a walk first, long enough for Tywin's forward commanders to understand what they were seeing and begin shouting, "Halt! Form up! Hold!" the orders crossing back over the water in pieces, cut apart by the current's noise. Then Edmure's men stopped walking, and the walking became something else, and the orders from the river became something else too. Robb arrived from the west 40 minutes later. Not with 5,000. With cavalry at a speed the autumn ground could barely support, gray wind 60 yards ahead of the horses, and already through what remained of the Lannister rearguard by the time the horses arrived. The rearguard had been watching south, watching east, not west. Because armies did not come from the west at a full gallop without a day's warning at minimum. That was the understanding. That was the doctrine. 2,000 horses at a gallop in open ground makes a sound that has no good description because it does not travel toward you, it swallows direction entirely, arrives as a fact before the mind has finished framing the question of where it is coming from. Tywin's army did not break. This must be stated clearly. Tywin's army did not break. Because Tywin's army was too disciplined and too experienced to break, simply because it was hit from 2 banks simultaneously, while crossing a cold river facing the wrong direction. It formed. It fought. It extracted itself with a competence that cost Robb 300 men, and cost Tywin the things that competence could not recover. The crossing equipment. The pontoon elements his engineers had spent 2 weeks assembling. His vanguard. The forward momentum that had been pressing south from Harrenhal since the Ravens arrived. Amory Lorch's column did not extract itself. It was cut off at the mill, between Robb's cavalry from the west and a second detachment from Glover closing the road north. And it ceased to exist as a fighting formation over 19 minutes, which was, Robb noted later, the same span as the Whispering Wood. He did not find this meaningful, he simply found it accurate. Amory Lorch had spent the campaign performing Tywin's cruelties, the burned villages, the murdered farmers, the particular efficiency of a man who understood that he existed to deliver messages written in other people's suffering. He died at the mill with his men, efficiently, without theater. Tywin Lannister returned to Harrenhal. Not retreated. Returned, he was precise about words, always, and the precision mattered more now than it usually did, because the words were the only thing left in the room that he controlled completely. He sat at the campaign table in the high chamber and looked at his maps and said nothing. His army was intact. His walls were the walls of the largest castle in Westeros, built by a king who had believed big enough meant safe enough, and had been proven wrong on a single afternoon, but had still left posterity 20-story towers and walls thick enough to absorb a trebuchet's work for a decade. He had 20,000 men and a supply line through the eastern riverlands that Robb could raid, but not close. He had no river crossing. No path south that Robb Stark's cavalry could not reach before his infantry. No initiative. He had, for the first time in this war, stopped moving. In the riverlands outside Harrenhal, the smoke from 3 villages thinned and cleared in the cold air. The fields were wet, and the river ran dark, and in the pre-dawn light the shapes of people were already visible on the north bank. Small folk returning to stone walls that were still standing, beginning the specific patient work of families who have rebuilt before, and know the order of operations. 3 villages. The price Edmure Tully had paid without speaking to Robb for 4 days after the battle, which was its own kind of accounting, and which Robb accepted because it was correct. The riverlands had stopped burning. Not healed. Not safe. But the fires that had been running since Clegane's first raid were out, the smoke was clearing, and the man who had ordered them was sitting inside the largest walls in Westeros, with his army intact and his options narrowed to a number he had not permitted himself to count yet. Robb rowed south. The letter from King's Landing arrived wrapped in 3 layers of a merchant's ledger, genuine entries on the outside, genuine entries in the middle, and between 2 pages of grain prices from the Reach, a single folded square of paper bearing no seal, no signature, and an answer. Robb read it at the window of the eastern tower, while the maester waited at a distance he had learned to maintain. He read it once for information, and once for what it did not say, which was usually the more useful document. Then, he held the paper over the candle flame and watched it go. The spider had written back 3 things: a specific night, a specific guard, a boat in the bay. The night was when Stannis' fleet made its coastal pass. The visible demonstration Stannis had ordered in the days after reading Robb's letter, sails on the outer bay at dusk, not attacking, simply occupying the southern horizon in the way that forced every consequential person in King's Landing to the towers to count them. 2 hours when the city's attention was distributed upward and outward, and the levels below the Red Keep ran on skeleton staffing. The guard was a man with debts the letter did not detail, which meant the debts were either too specific to be written or too personal, and in either case were Varys's business rather than Robb's. The boat would be at a private dock on the west bank of the Blackwater, and the contact who brought them to it would ask for the name of the last fish landed at White Harbor, which was a piece of information Robb did not know, and had to look up in a shipping manifest the River Run maester kept for trade correspondence. He memorized the answer: the Amber Shore. Longfish, 300 pounds, late summer. Then, he chose his 9 men. He could not go himself. He had argued with this fact for 2 days before Varys's letter arrived, and found no way through it. He was the command, not the administration, not the symbol, the actual operational thinking of the campaign, the thing that had identified Roose Bolton and managed Walder Frey, and positioned Glover at Oxcross and held Edmure at the stone mill until it mattered. If he went south and did not return, or went south and was taken, the war came apart at its center. His father would not want him to go. His father would understand, with his father's specific precision, exactly what it cost Robb not to go, and would not want it anyway. He chose men from the Vale who had been serving in the northern host, men whose accents held the capital's particular flatness, the sound of the Blackwater rather than the neck, men who did not look like what they were, who could carry themselves as craftsmen's hands and fishermen and a merchant's guards without the posture that northern soldiers developed, without realizing they were developing it. He told them only what they needed: the night, the dock, the name of the fish. He told them to take chains that were good quality and not punitive, and to speak to his father like a lord, not a prisoner. He told them to show the signet ring before they spoke a word. They left for the Bay of Blackwater on a fishing vessel carrying genuine fish, which the River Run maester arranged with the specific unhurried efficiency of a man who had spent his career knowing which threads to pull. They entered the city over 3 nights, 3 separate entries, the principle being that 9 men arriving together registered differently in a gate sergeant's memory than 3 men who arrived separately and happened to share lodgings in the same district of the city without appearing to know each other. The first group entered as craftsmen carrying tool rolls, the second as fishermen with an empty cart. The third attached to a wool merchant's guard rotation, which the wool merchant, a man with debts to Varys that predated the war, had made available without being told why. They met in a cellar off the Street of Steel on the 3rd night, 9 men sitting in a room lit by a single candle, speaking in voices kept low not from fear, but from the city's quality of acoustics. The way sound traveled through old stone, through shared walls, into the awareness of neighbors who might not be neighbors. The plan was simple. Simple plans survived contact with the unexpected better than complicated ones. The door. The guard. The dock. They waited for dusk. At dusk, Stannis Baratheon's fleet appeared on the southern horizon. Not attacking. Not signaling. 40 sails resolving from the haze above the Blackwater Bay, in the particular amber light of a late autumn evening, arranged in a line that ran east to west across the bay's mouth, with the unhurried precision of men who had nowhere to go and wanted you to know it. King's Landing went to its towers, nobles, servants, goldcloaks, maesters. Small folk pressing 3 deep at every window and every gate and every rooftop that offered a southern view, the city's entire upward attention compressing into one direction. The specific collective fear of a population that had been told its walls were safe and was now being shown proof to the contrary without yet understanding what kind of proof it was. Below that attention, in the levels beneath the Red Keep where the torches burned low and the stone wept cold water and footsteps went sideways in the dark, a door opened. Eddard Stark had been here 3 months. He sat with his back against the wall and his bad leg extended straight, the leg broken in the ambush outside the brothel. Healed imperfectly, because imperfect was the only available grade. The beard had grown past the point where it remembered his jaw's shape. He was thinner. This was a fact, not a complaint. He had organized himself into facts over 3 months, the guard schedule, mapped through listening to footsteps. The feeding patterns. The way the lamplight shifted at dawn, a fraction warmer. The only clock available. He was alive. His children were alive, as far as ravens had told him before the ravens stopped coming. He did not extend that line of reasoning further. He had learned which lines consumed resources he needed for other things. The lock moved differently. Not a feeding. Not a guard change. The specific sound of a mechanism operated carefully, without the habitual noise of routine, the sound of a thing opening that was not supposed to be opening. Ned straightened. His hand went to where his sword should have been, the instinct arriving 3 months ahead of the thought, which told him something about what the body held that the mind could not release. He stayed against the wall and watched the door. 3 men. Veil accents, his ear placed them before his eyes had adjusted to the lamp they carried. Plain clothes, nothing with sigil or color. The middleman held a ring forward. Ned knew the ring before he had finished forming the thought about the ring. The wolf's head. The scratch on the inner band from a sparring incident in the Winterfell yard 7 years ago that he had meant to repair and had not repaired. His chest did something he did not permit his face to do. "Your son sends his regards, my lord," the man said. "He says, the war is not what it was when you left." Ned looked at the ring for one long moment. Then he closed his hand around it and stood on the bad leg which held. "How long do we have?" 2 hours, if we move now. Ned moved. 3 nights on the Blackwater Bay in a boat that smelled of the fish that had preceded them. Cold water, overcast sky, the Westerosi coast a dark line to the north. Ned spent most of it in the bow watching the water. Hands around a flask of something warm the men had brought that tasted of black pepper and bad wine, and was the best thing he had put in his body in 3 months. His hands shook, for the first time in 3 months. There was no audience here. He let them. He arrived at Riverrun at dawn, coming off the dock with the bad leg and the beard and the permanent cold of a man whose temperature had been changed by something that was not weather. The sky was gray, and the 2 rivers met behind the dock in the low morning light, running in different directions before finding each other, and standing at the end of the dock was his son. Alone, no honor guard, no assembled lords, nothing that would have required Ned to arrange his face for an audience. Just Robb, with gray wind at his heel, watching him walk. Robb grabbed his arm when he reached him. Not an embrace, an anchor, the specific grip of a man confirming that what he is holding is staying real. His hand on Ned's forearm, and it did not let go. "I know you have questions," Robb said. "Just one," Ned said. Robb waited. How? The rivers ran behind them. A bird called once above the water and did not repeat itself. "The old gods showed me," Robb said. Ned looked at his son. He looked at the auburn hair that was Catelyn's and the eyes that were also Catelyn's, and the face that had become something with no simple parentage. He looked at the thing behind the eyes, not the visions themselves but the weight of having used them, the specific gravity of a person who had looked at something no one was supposed to see and then acted on it, and was living, quietly and without complaint, with what acting on it required. He had raised a son who would count the costs alone. At night, in the Stark way, without ever naming them aloud. He nodded once. They had a great deal to talk about. Almost none of it would be spoken now, in the gray light, on a dock where the water ran in 2 directions at once. There would be time. For the first time in 3 months, Ned Stark believed that. Tywin Lannister had been arranging tables for other men's benefit since he was 20 years old, and he had learned. Over 40 years of arranging them, that the distance between chairs was a statement that arrived before anyone spoke. He made them closer than they needed to be, close enough that the man across from him would need to maintain composure at a range that most men found difficult. That was the courtesy, the first weapon, the one no one saw coming because it arrived wearing the right clothes. He crossed the parley field with his two advisors, and Grey Wind's breathing audible through the canvas from 15 yards away. That last detail registered and was filed. The wolf was outside the tent, which meant Stark controlled what he brought in and what he left outside, which meant the wolf's absence was deliberate. The tent was already occupied. Robb Stark at the table's right end, younger than expected and sitting in the posture of a man who had arrived early and settled into waiting rather than the posture of a man performing it. Catelyn Tully Stark beside him. Tywin marked the Tully connection automatically, the political leverage network it implied. And at the table's left, in a chair placed at a particular angle that gave it neither prominence nor obscurity, Eddard Stark. Tywin stopped. 1 second. Then he continued to his chair, arranged himself, and smiled with the practiced warmth of a man who had deployed warmth as a technical instrument for 50 years. "Lord Stark," he said to Robb, "I confess I expected your terms by Raven. That you've come in person speaks to a certain confidence. Or a preference for accuracy," Robb said. "Ravens compress things. They do." Tywin looked at Ned and inclined his head by the precise measure that courtesy required, without adding warmth. "Lord Stark, you look well, given the circumstances." Ned said nothing. He looked at Tywin with gray eyes that had come back from 3 months underground and were not finished processing what they'd found there. He was thinner. The beard had grown wrong. He held himself with the specific control of a man managing a bad leg and declining to mention it. His presence required no elaboration. He was the proof. Every claim Tywin had made about Ned's treason, sitting in that chair, alive and uncharged, was now an argument that had to be relitigated before an audience that had not yet assembled but was already forming. Tywin returned to Robb. "You've had a successful campaign," he said. "The phrase generous, the tone correct, the acknowledgement calibrated to give nothing while appearing to give something. The Whispering Wood was well executed. Oxcross, a pause. Remarkably timed. I had good information. So it seems." Tywin reached for the wine, drank, set the cup down. "What does House Stark require to return my son and end this campaign?" Robb looked at him with the blue-gray eyes that were entirely his mother's. He did not answer immediately. He let the question sit in the tent the way a stone sits in still water, present, settled, not going anywhere. "There's something I want to discuss first," Robb said. "Before terms. Of course, I've been thinking about the wedding you planned, my lord." The tent went quiet. Not the absence of sound. Outside, a horse shifted. The wind touched the canvas. Grey Wind's breathing continued its slow, unhurried rhythm. Inside, something changed that was not sound. Tywin's hands on the table did not move. His face did not move. His two advisors, who had been tracking the conversation with the alert attention of men paid for alertness, looked at each other and found no reference point for what they had just heard. "I'm not certain what you, the twins," Robb said, "my Lord Roose Bolton, my Lord Walder Frey, the letter you planned to send them when I broke the Frey marriage pact." A pause. The massacre of a guest and his host under the ancient law that is held for 10,000 years. He said this without heat. The same tone a man might use to report a supply count or a road condition. A thing that was simply true, to be stated and received. Tywin looked at him. For the first time in this meeting, Tywin was doing something he rarely needed to do, reading a face rather than directing one. He ran the possibilities with the speed of a mind built for exactly this exercise. A spy with extraordinary access possible, but the details were too internal. Too located in thoughts he had not yet committed to correspondence. A bluff constructed from partial intelligence, possible, but a bluff of this precision carried its own collapse if the other side confirmed it and called it. Or the boy was telling the truth about something for which Tywin had no established framework. "The old gods showed you," Tywin said. Flat, testing the shape of it. "The old gods showed me enough. I see." He said it the way he said things when he was not yet finished deciding what he saw. He closed his eyes, not blinked, closed, the specific duration of a man giving a mechanism its required time. 2 seconds, then open again. "You executed Lord Bolton before the army left the neck," Tywin said, "before he could sell me to you." "Yes, and Lord Frey has no agreement with me and no grievance against me. I offered him something more useful than a murdered guest." Tywin was quiet. "Then, what would you like to discuss, my lord?" "An accounting," Robb said. He laid it out without introduction. The sack of King's Landing at the end of Robert's rebellion. The murder of Princess Elia Martell. Her children, their names, the rooms of the Red Keep where it happened, the men Tywin had sent to do it, and not sent any instructions to be discreet about. The reigns of Castamere, a house that had overreached, yes, but overreached into a response so complete that no stone was left on another stone, and the song written about it had become Tywin's preferred method of introduction. He said none of it with drama. He said it the way you read a ledger that does not balance. Tywin listened with the face of a man who has known this moment was theoretically possible for decades, and has, in the abstract, prepared for it, and, in the specific encounter, found that the preparation did not address the reality. "Robert Baratheon pardoned House Lannister," he said when the list was finished, "for all acts committed before his coronation." "Robert Baratheon is dead," Robb said. "His pardons died with him." "You're suggesting the new king would not honor the pardon of his predecessor. I'm suggesting the new king was never consulted about it." Tywin looked at him. "You." The inflection was exact. Not a question, not a statement, the particular register of a man identifying what category of problem he has encountered. "Someone with a better claim than Joffrey," Robb said. "Someone whose legitimacy doesn't require a pardon from the woman who manufactured it." At the table's left, Ned Stark's bad leg shifted under his chair. He had not spoken. He was not going to speak. His presence was already doing the work. "You cannot hold the Riverlands without the Reach," Tywin said. "I know. The Tyrells command 60,000 swords. The moment Mace Tyrell understands which side of this war offers his house more, I have a conversation scheduled with Lord Mace Tyrell." Robb set his cup down. "I think he'll be interested in what I know about his house's prospects under a bastard king." A pause, quiet as the intake of breath. "He has a daughter, my lord. She'll need a husband whose blood right no one can argue against. Not a bastard's claim." The tent held this. Tywin Lannister looked at the boy across the table, the auburn hair, the Tully eyes. The hands that were not yet fully a man's hands and had nonetheless spent 6 months executing a campaign that had destroyed 2 Lannister armies, recovered a hostage from the Black Cells, managed Walder Frey without a marriage pact, and arrived at this parley with a position that Tywin had spent 40 years ensuring no one would ever be able to occupy. His advisors did not move. Grey wind breathed through the canvas. Catelyn Stark looked at her son with an expression that had moved past the things she had names for and into a country she was still mapping. Tywin said nothing. Not calculation now, not silence as tactic. He had nothing to say because the card that had been his certainty, his final strategic certainty since the Ravens arrived from Oxcross and the Whispering Wood, was not, apparently, his card at all. It never had been. He still had 20,000 men at Harrenhal. He still had Casterly Rock and the gold beneath it, and a family name that meant power in a way that would outlast this campaign and the next one. He was not finished. He told himself this precisely, because precision was what remained. He rose, after a long time, and inclined his head at the measure that courtesy required and no further. "I look forward to reading the terms," he said. He left the tent with his advisors and crossed the neutral ground back toward Harrenhal's walls. He did not look back. He did not alter his pace. He walked as a man walks, who has had a difficult meeting and is already organizing his response. Grey wind watched him go from the tent's entrance, amber eyes level, unblinking. The room at the center of every chess game in Westeros was no longer his. He was already working out where to build the new one. That was not hope. That was simply what Tywin Lannister did when the ground moved. He looked for higher ground, and he started walking. And he did not stop until he found it, or until there was nowhere left to walk. Behind him, in the tent, a 15-year-old lord poured himself more wine, and said nothing. Riverrun had not hosted a great council in living memory, and the castle showed it, every available chamber converted to sleeping quarters for lords who had arrived with their households, the great hall rearranged so that the lord's table faced a half-circle of lesser tables, like a court of law that had not yet decided what it was trying. And the ravens in the eastern tower going in and out at a pace the maester described later as unprecedented in his 30-year tenure. Banners arrived first, the northern direwolf and the tullyfish, already present. Then the Baratheon stag, carried by outriders who came 2 hours ahead of their lord, with the precise efficiency of men who understood that the stag's arrival was itself a statement requiring preparation. Then the river lords, the smaller houses of the Trident, who had been waiting to see which way the current ran before declaring it had always been running this direction. They came in ones and pairs and groups, dismounting in the yard, conducting the political temperature-taking that preceded every formal assembly. Eyes moving. Hands not quite shaking. The specific atmosphere of men who understood that what was about to happen would be recorded, and were already thinking about how they would be recorded in it. Stannis Baratheon in person was exactly what his reputation had prepared Robb for, which meant the preparation had been inadequate. He was broad through the shoulder with the look of a man who had once been built for physical work and had not entirely stopped being built for it, despite decades of councils and campaigns. His jaw was a fact. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had spent 30 years being right about things that cost him nothing except the ability to enjoy being right about them. He crossed the solar with the walk of someone who had decided years ago exactly how fast he moved through rooms and saw no cause to revisit the decision. He looked at Robb. Robb looked at him. Neither of them spoke. The quality of the silence was specific. Two men who knew exactly what they needed from each other and had independently concluded that the first to name it was at a disadvantage they couldn't quantify, but could feel. Robb had won a campaign. Stannis had a fleet and a blood right no one could argue around. The exchange rate between these things was not established. Grey wind lay against the far wall and did not take sides. Davos Seaworth cleared his throat. He had the patient expression of a man accustomed to facilitating conversations between people too stubborn to initiate them. He crossed to the table and poured 2 cups and set one in front of the empty chair beside Robb, and one in front of the empty chair beside where Stannis was standing. "My lord," he said to Stannis, "the wine's good. Riverrun keeps a decent cellar." Stannis sat. Robb sat. "You're shorter than your letters," Stannis said. "You're exactly as described," Robb said. Davos looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Right," he said. The Alliance. The Great Council convened at mid-morning. The half-circle of tables was full. Lords of the North, lords of the Riverlands, Stannis Baratheon with Davos at his left. Ned Stark sat beside Robb, with the composed attention of a man who had rehearsed this moment from the black cells on the assumption he would never see it. His hands were flat on the table and still. Robb opened it without ceremony. "We are here to ask one question," he said. "Is Joffrey Baratheon the legitimate king of the Seven Kingdoms? Everything that follows depends on the answer to that question. We will answer it with evidence. When the evidence is complete, the assembled lords will decide." The river lords exchanged glances. The Great Jon did not exchange glances with anyone, because the Great Jon had decided 3 minutes into his first meeting with Stannis Baratheon that the man was the right shape for a king, and had not complicated this assessment since. Ned gave his testimony first. He spoke for 40 minutes in the precise, deliberate manner of a man who has organized information over a long time in a dark room and is now presenting it in the order it was arranged. Jon Arryn's investigation. The records from the brothels and the goldsmith shop, the black-haired children, Robert's bastards, none of whom bore any resemblance to the Golden Joffrey. The book of lineages and the specific entry that had gotten Jon Arryn killed. He named his source. He named the chain of evidence. He stopped when he was done. Then, Stannis presented his documentation. Drier than Ned's account, more methodical, the work of a man who had compiled evidence the way he compiled everything, exhaustively, without leaving gaps for other interpretations to occupy. Dates, names, the specific wording of letters Jon Arryn had sent Stannis in the weeks before his death. Then the clerk read Jaime Lannister's letter into the record. The hall was very quiet during the reading. Jaime came in after the letter. He had asked to speak in person, which had taken Robb 3 hours and one long conversation with Catelyn to permit. He arrived in chains, good quality, correctly fitted, which he had the presence of mind to notice, and which told him something about the lord who had ordered them. He walked to the floor before the tables, and stood with the bearing of a man who has worn armor his entire adult life, and carries the memory of it in his spine regardless of what he's wearing now. He looked at the assembled lords. He did not look apologetic. This was the first thing the hall registered. The second thing was that he was also not performing defiance. He stood in chains before a council of men who had built their political identities around hating what he was, and he looked like a man who had decided that the only thing left worth doing was to be completely accurate. "The letter is correct," he said. "Everything in it happened. I wrote it willingly." He paused. "Lord Stark," he looked at Robb, "did not compel the confession. He asked me questions and I answered them, because I have been carrying what is in that letter for 14 years, and it has gone nowhere useful." He looked at the assembled lords. "I'll tell you something else that isn't in the letter," he said. "Since you've gathered to discuss the legitimacy of a king, you should know what I know about the last king I swore to protect." The hall waited. Daenerys Targaryen had caches of wildfire beneath King's Landing, beneath the Sept of Baelor, beneath the Dragon Pit, beneath the Red Keep's own foundations, enough to burn the city to the waterline. He said this without drama, in the flat register of a report. He intended to use it when Robert's forces reached the gates. His exact words to me were, if he could not hold the city, he would burn it, and everyone in it, and the ashes would be his inheritance. A pause. I killed him before he could give the order to his pyromancer. I then killed the pyromancer. The hall produced a sound that was not quite sound, the collective intake of breath and adjustment of position that a room makes when a thing it has organized itself around is suddenly different. "Everyone calls me Kingslayer," Jaime said. "The song doesn't have a second verse. The song doesn't mention 500,000 people." He looked at no one in particular. "I am not asking you to think better of me. I am asking you to enter accurate information into your record, since you're building a legal case and accuracy seems relevant." He was escorted out. The hall did not immediately begin talking. It sat with the specific weight of people revising something they had held in place for 14 years. The deliberation took 6 hours. The verdict, when it came, had the character of something that had been true for a while before anyone said it formally. Joffrey Baratheon was declared illegitimate by the assembled lords of the North and Riverlands, with Stannis Baratheon's formal concurrence as the last surviving legitimate son of Robert's line. The Iron Throne passed by blood, right to Stannis. This was recorded in 5 copies by 5 different clerks, and sealed with the seals of every lord present. Robb asked for one modification to the terms of Joffrey's disposition. Not execution. Removal to Casterly Rock, in the custody of whatever remained of the Lannister household administration, watched, but alive. He gave his reason once. Dead boys became symbols faster than living ones became irrelevant. The assembled lords did not all agree. Several were explicit about their disagreement. Robb held the position, and the position held. Joffrey Baratheon, still a boy in years, was deposed. King's Landing opened its gates 3 days after the proclamation. The Ravens had arrived ahead of Stannis' fleet, and the city's gold cloaks, pragmatic men whose loyalty had always been to the salary rather than the sigil, had conducted a rapid internal calculation and reached a conclusion. The gates were open when Stannis' advance riders reached them. Cersei Lannister was escorted under guard to a tower of the Red Keep. The escort was courteous. The guard was not ornamental. She was taken through the same corridors that had been hers for 15 years, past servants who did not look directly at her, to a room that was comfortable and high and had a window that looked north. She was alive. This was Robb's decision, and not everyone agreed with it, and the disagreement was Robb's to manage. He would manage it the way he managed everything now, with a vision in his chest that he did not discuss, and a list that he revised every night before he slept, crossing out the things that had been handled and looking at the things that remained. The war was over. Robb looked at the things that remained. The list was still long. Winterfell smelled of itself before it was visible. That was the first thing. Coming over the last ridge in the gray autumn light, the smell arriving before the shape of the towers, before the banners, before the gates. Wood smoke from the great hearths, bread from the kitchens, horse from the stable block, and beneath all of it the specific cold of northern stone, a cold that was different from the cold of Riverrun or Moat Cailin or the Twins, different from the cold of 3 months of campaign. It was the cold of a place that had been cold since before there was a name for cold, and it smelled to Robb exactly like the inside of his chest when he had nothing left to manage. He had told himself, riding north, that he would not feel it until he felt it. He had managed every other thing with the same architecture. Wait for the fact. Then process the fact. Then move. He had told himself this would be the same. It was not the same. Winterfell stood. That was the only sentence that mattered. He had lived for months with the vision's image of it, walls opened like a wound, towers black with fire, the direwolf banner gone and something else in its place. He had made every decision about Theon Greyjoy with that image at the back of it, not anger, because anger was the wrong instrument, but the cold, specific knowledge of what happened if Theon was left with unsupervised authority over a castle and men he thought he deserved. He had kept Theon close and given him a tactical role that used what he was good for without touching what he could not be trusted with. The walls were whole, the towers were standing, the banner moved in the northern wind. He did not say anything. He rode through the gate. Bran was in the yard in a cart his maester had built to his specifications, wide-wheeled for the uneven stone, padded at the back so he could sit upright and watch the gate without needing to be carried. He was watching the gate when Robb came through it, and he had the expression of someone who had been watching for a while and had organized himself into patience while he waited. Arya was beside him. She was wearing northern clothes that did not belong to her, and carrying a sword at her hip that absolutely did not belong to her, and the look on her face was the look of someone who had fought her way back from wherever she had been, and was not finished deciding how she felt about the people who had let the situation requiring fighting back happen in the first place. She looked at Robb. He looked at her. The accounting between them would take years, and would never be fully settled, and both of them understood this without saying it. Sansa stood at Bran's other side, returned from King's Landing in the political settlement's wake, taller than he remembered, carrying herself with the specific posture of someone who has learned that posture is the only thing entirely within their own control. She did not run to him. She stood and held his gaze, and he understood, looking at his sister. That King's Landing had made her something their mother's lessons alone could not have made her. He dismounted. Grey Wind went to Bran first, which was not surprising. The wolf moved to his brother's cart and put his head against Bran's hand and held it there, and Bran's fingers went into the grey fur and closed, and neither of them made a sound. Then Ned Stark came through the inner gate. He was walking better than the dock at Riverrun. The bad leg had continued its imperfect recovery, finding workarounds the way the body finds workarounds when properly supplied with time and food and sleep. The beard was still there, trimmed now into something intentional rather than accidental. He was not the man who had ridden south from Winterfell the previous year. That man had ridden south with a clear conscience and a clear assignment, into a southern court where clarity of that kind was worth less than nothing. This man had come back. That was its own statement. He walked through the gate and looked at his children and his yard and his walls, and he did not make a sound. He put his hand on Robb's shoulder. He said something low, too low for the yard to hear, his voice kept in the register he used for the things that mattered most to him, the register that required leaning in to receive. The narrator did not record what he said. Some things are not public events. They sat until the candles burned low. Robb answered every question. He had decided, riding north, that the accounting with his father would be complete, because incomplete accounting was what had gotten his father into the black cells in the first place. The world required honest ledgers. He had learned this from Ned Stark, and was now in the position of demonstrating the lesson to the teacher. Ned asked about Roose Bolton. He asked about the Frey negotiation and what Robb had known, and how he had known it. He asked about Jaime's letter and the conditions under which it was written. He asked each question in the quiet voice, and listened to each answer in the same quality of quiet, and he did not condemn, and he did not applaud. When the answers were finished, he was silent for a while. "The old gods do not give gifts for free," Ned said. "You paid for this. You'll be paying for it for the rest of your life." He looked at his son across the candlelight, the blue-gray eyes, the auburn hair, the hands that had used a sword at the heart tree and a quill in a rookery, and both of them in service of something that had not yet finished asking. "That is not a condemnation. That is just the way the debt works." Robb looked at his father. "I know," he said. The candles burned. Outside, Winterfell's walls stood in the northern dark, the way they had stood for 8,000 years, imperfect and particular and sufficient. He went to the crypts alone. Grey wind came. Grey wind always came, which meant alone was a relative term. But the wolf understood the crypts in the way he understood the godswood at Moat Cailin, a place requiring a different kind of attention than roads and camps and the noise of 18,000 men finding their camp rhythms. The wolf moved quietly on the stone and did not press against him, simply accompanied. The torchlight moved ahead of them down the long passage, and the dead kings watched from their alcoves, older and cruder the deeper you went, the skill of centuries running backward toward something that predated artisanship entirely, the oldest figures barely human in shape. Robb had come here as a boy to feel afraid and important. He came now to stand in front of a specific alcove near the newer graves. Lyanna Stark's statue had her father's nose and her mother's mouth, and the particular quality of carved stone faces that captured neither. He stood in front of it for a long time. The vision had not shown him everything. He had known this from the first morning at the Weirwood Root, that the old gods showed you enough, not all. And the line between enough and all was drawn by a logic he did not have access to. The vision had shown him the Red Wedding, Bolton, the fall of Winterfell, Catelyn. It had shown him the wall at the very end, vast and pale blue in the vision's last light, and something beyond it, pressing, patient, cold in a way that the north was cold but more so, old in a way that the crypts were old but older. It had not shown him Lyanna, not her face, not the Tower of Joy, not the specific contents of a secret she had taken with her into this stone. He looked at the statue and thought about dark hair and gray eyes, and the face of a brother who had grown up at his side looking nothing like him. He thought about what it would mean if he knew, and what he would do with knowing. He did not know. He let that be. He touched the stone once, his fingers against the base of the statue where the mason had smoothed the join between figure and plinth, and he stood in the cold of the crypts with his wolf and the long silence of 8,000 years of Stark dead, and then he walked back up into the light. Jon was in the yard. He had made the ride from Castle Black in a day and a half, which was the ride of someone who had received a raven and not waited to decide whether to come. He was taller, not dramatically, a matter of inches, the difference between a boy who left for the wall and a young man who had spent a year on it, who had seen what the wall showed you when you looked at it long enough. He was carrying it in his face the way the wall carried weather, not showing the storms themselves, but showing that the storms had happened. He looked like a Stark. He had always looked like a Stark. Robb crossed the yard. "You've been very specific about keeping me at the wall," Jon said. "The wall is important. I know the wall is important. The Lord Commander is less convinced that a raven from a 15-year-old constitutes sufficient. Not the wall," Robb said. "What's on the other side of it?" Jon was quiet. "The wildlings. Not the wildlings." Grey wind moved between them and sat. Between them, specifically, the wolf finding the exact center of the space and settling into it as if the geometry had been arranged for this purpose. Jon looked at his brother. He looked at him the way he had always looked at him, with the particular attention of someone who grew up reading a face they were told they had no right to and had read it anyway, in the way of those who have no other option. "What did you see?" he asked. "In the vision." "The wall," Robb said, "from the south side, looking north, and something on the other side that was not wildlings and was not anything I have a name for." He held Jon's gaze. "I have a kingdom to put back together. I have a king on a throne who kept his end of a bargain and will be watching the north for any reason to revisit the terms. I have bannermen who swore loyalty to something they believe is the old god's instrument, and will need that to keep being true." He paused. "I cannot also be the man watching the wall. You want me to watch it." I want you to tell me everything the Lord Commander will not put in his ravens. Everything that keeps you awake. Another pause. Everything Sam Tarly has found in the old books that nobody is reading closely enough. The yard was cold and dark, and the stars were out above Winterfell's walls, the northern sky doing what it always did. Too wide, too many stars, the kind of sky that made human arrangements feel provisional. Jon said, "You know, when you rode south, I thought the hardest part of the war was going to be for you." "It was," Robb said. "What's coming north is worse." Yes, Jon looked at the sky for a moment. The wall was 600 miles north and invisible, but a man who had stood on top of it and looked at what stood beyond it carried the view with him in the same way Robb carried the vision. It did not require proximity to be present. "All right," Jon said. Inside the great hall, Ned Stark sat at a table with Catelyn and the northern lords, a candle burning between them, the long administration of the peace already begun, the grain counts, the garrison assignments, the slow patient work of a realm being put back together from the ground up. His voice came through the door in the same register it always had, steady and specific and honest. At Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon read a border dispute document at his table, with his jaw set and his handwriting precise in the margin notes, the new king doing what he had always done, the work that needed doing, without sentiment, because it was the work, and it needed doing. In a tower of the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister looked north through a window, at a city that had found a new arrangement for itself without consulting her. At Casterly Rock, in a room that was comfortable and watched, a boy who had been a king sat with his hands in his lap and looked at nothing in particular. In the far north, beyond the wall, in the dark between the trees where the cold was not weather but something older than weather, something patient beyond the measure of human patience, moved slowly toward a world it had been moving toward for 8,000 years. Only 2 people in Westeros were thinking about it yet. They stood in a cold yard beneath the northern stars with a dire wolf between them, not speaking. 2 brothers, one with auburn hair and tully eyes, one with dark hair and the face of the north, preparing to save a realm they had just finished fighting for. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.